and sweets on my website. Folks order from them, and then I bake every Friday afternoon, and they come to my house and pick them up. So this is actually the beginning of my summer vacation. So if you're interested in ordering bread from me, you'll have to wait until the end of August. But this is a great project to take on as a new one, to learn about bread and to pick up some tips. When Nicole asked me to do this, I was a little leery because, of course, bread has been around for thousands and thousands of years, and this is a making sense of bread. Whole civilizations have risen and fallen around wheat. There are libraries worth of books written about bread. So to capture bread in 45 minutes is asking a lot. I'm going to give you a microcosm of bread in about probably 60 minutes. What I'm presenting tonight is a basic artisan bread. It is a very lean dough, and by that I mean it is made of 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, and yeast. There are many other breads that will have eggs and sugar and butter and oil in them, and those are considered enriched doughs, but this is a very lean, straightforward dough. It is based on an article. Well, it's my recipes, but my recipes were featured in the Midwestern Living magazine back in the January-February issue, and so that's what I've printed out here. Does anybody need a copy of the recipes at the moment? Just raise your hand, and Tom will bring a copy to you. All right, great. Looks like we're set. I think this is a great dough for beginner bread bakers, partly because it's very straightforward. It involves using time and temperature to take care of some of the mixing for you. It is a no-knead dough. So what I'll be demonstrating later today is how to mix it and then how to shape it. But there's a lot of sort of, I won't say dead time, but time where the dough does things by itself and you don't have to do anything to it, which is handy when you want to have bread on a regular basis. So I'm going to just actually work through the recipe here. Am I still in the camera? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Perfect, great. So you'll notice on the recipe page that there are both volume measurements and weight measurements. I highly recommend, if you're going to be doing bread baking on any regular basis, that you purchase a scale like this. It took me forever to buy a scale, but it makes a whole lot of difference, especially if you're trying for consistency of your end product and your end breads. How much of flour I get in a cup of scoop will differ from me to you to other people, depending on how hard you scoop that flour. So weight is always universal, and so I highly recommend weighing your ingredients as you go. So what I'm putting in my bag here is 700 grams of unbleached flour. The flour I use is from Heartland Mill in Marienthal, Kansas. It's an organic flour, but you'll notice on the very back page of your handout that there are other resources for flour that are good for bread. In general, you're wanting a bread flour that is between 11 and 12.5% protein content. Flour that is all-purpose bleached may not have that stronger protein, but there are resources here in Hayes. The Hudson Cream is a great brand. The King Arthur is a great brand. All of those will work fine for this dough. This dough can be mixed in a mixer if you have a stand mixer, but it is also a very wet and soft dough, so it lends itself to being mixed by hand fairly easily. And what you're going to do is combine your salt, your yeast, and your flour all together in a bowl. The salt I'm using is kosher, so it has slightly larger crystals. If you want to just use table salt, that's fine, but you will need to use less volume. If you are using measuring spoons to weigh or to measure your salt, and you're using table salt, it'll be about 1 2/3 teaspoon as opposed to 2 teaspoons. Again, 14 grams of table salt is the same as 14 grams of kosher salt. It's the same as 14 grams of rock salt. So if you are weighing, then you don't have to worry about the degree, the size of your crystal, okay? The yeast I'm using is called instant yeast. I buy this brand. It's used by professional bakers. You can use active dry yeast that you'll find in the grocery store. What I like about this is that I can mix it directly into the flour. I don't have to mix it with water in advance. It doesn't have to be dissolved or anything like that. If you are using active dry yeast, you might dissolve it in a little bit of water first, and then put it into your flour and with the rest of your ingredients. But it's not actually essential. You can do it without it. So then I'm going to be pouring into my flour here 525 grams of water, which is 2 1/3 cups. And we're just going to stir until we get all the flour incorporated with the water. And you can see it comes together pretty quickly. That's because there's so much water in this mixture. Who here has done bread dough before? Okay, yeah. So I don't know if you've done it by hand and you're doing a dough that has less water. There's a lot of mixing that has to go on before it comes together. But what I'm looking for here is that all the flour has been incorporated, so no flour visible. And then I'm going to take a stiff spatula. You could do this with the back of your wooden spoon as well. And I'm just going to run it through the whole mass of dough, pulling little bits across the bowl, really just making sure that there are no lumps of flour that got buried in the mass. Like that. I may come down underneath. I can see there's a little dry flour at the bottom there, if you can see that. So I'm just going to press into that, incorporate the water and the flour together. And that is all the mixing that we're going to do on this dough. And then we're going to use basically time and temperature to take care of the rest of the dough for us. So by that I mean we're going to we're going to do a series of stretch and folds of the dough to sort of increase the strength over the space of an hour. And then we're going to put the dough in the refrigerator overnight. And you will see this dough, even in the next 15 to 30 minutes, go from fairly ragged to very smooth and fairly weak, so I can pull sections off like that, to fairly strong and elastic. And that is all a matter of letting time do its thing. So when you add water to flour, it breaks apart the two protein strands and then allows them to reassemble into gluten. And that gluten, as you mix and as you stretch and fold, develops sort of a network, a net of protein strands that will give your dough structure, and it will also become sort of the net for capturing the carbon dioxide that the yeast will give off as the rising and fermentation begins. So I've sprayed my bucket here with a little oil so the dough won't stick because it is quite sticky. And dump it in here. And then at this point, I usually like to do what I call a cleanup fold. So because this dough is so sticky, I'm going to dip my hands in water. And I'm just going to pull it. So if you think of the dough as sort of north, south, east, west, I'm doing a north and a south fold, an east and a west. At this point, I'm not really pulling the dough out very far because it would tear. It has not developed strength. But I will come back and do that exact same thing in 15 minutes, and then at 30, and then at 45, and I'll be able to pull it further and further apart. You'll see how it smooths out and becomes dough for bread. So Tom, can you set me a 15-minute timer? Thanks. Okay. I did not think about washing my hands. The things you do when you're not in your kitchen. Okay. All right. So let's see. Let me just make sure. I'm going to actually pause for a minute. Are there any questions about how to mix that dough? Okay. All right. If you have questions, we can hold them till the end, but if there's just some burning issue you want to know about, then feel free to interrupt me along the way.
I have a question.
Yes.
So if you were using a mixer to do this, can you overwork it to start with?
Not really. What you would do, that's a good question. So in my mixer, you would just maybe run it 2 minutes until everything looks fairly homogeneous. Okay, so you don't have big chunks of flour or anything, but still very weak as far as a dough. You're not looking to develop the dough strength. The other thing I should mention is, and you'll see it listed in your handout, is the kind of flour that you use sort of impacts the dough structure and consistency. So say you wanted to convert this recipe to a part whole wheat flour, or whole wheat bread. This dough, I think, can handle up to about a 35% whole wheat blend. So you would sub out some whole wheat for the flour that's listed in the recipe. Whole wheat is a thirstier flour because of all that bran and germ, so you're going to have to add a little more water. Whole wheat also, because of the bran and the germ that are still in the flour, those act as sort of like little razor blades against your gluten strands, your lovely gluten that you're trying to develop. So most whole wheat breads are going to be a little softer. They're not going to rise as much. You're not going to have as big an open crumb as you might with just a pure wheat flour. Yes?
Is there a difference between white whole wheat and red whole wheat?
Not as far as how it reacts in making bread. There is a flavor difference. So white, for those of you who don't know, there's wheat, there's red wheat, and then there's white wheat. White wheat is a grain, just like red wheat is, but it's been genetically encouraged to have a milder taste as far as the brand. So some red wheat kernels are, it has a little bitterer taste to it. So it's a milder flavor and a lighter color, but it reacts the same way. Yeah, we'll leave it there. Okay, so Tom, can you go get me that bucket of dough from the kitchen? All right. So what I usually do is once it's sat in the refrigerator overnight, then I feel like I can start using that dough. The dough that made the samples that I'll be handing out later today, I made yesterday. You can leave this in the refrigerator for maybe 2 to 4 days and still get a good rise out of it. Yeast is very temperature sensitive. So in between, say, 38 and 50 degrees, yeast is not going to do much. It's not going to ferment. Thank you. So you don't have to really worry about the dough over fermenting in the fridge. But after a while, things are going to start to break down. If you made this and then forgot about it 2 weeks later, it's not going to be a very pretty dough. You're not going to want to use it. You might just sort of like hold your nose while you throw it away. So there is some activity going on, but not within the first probably week, but certainly within the first 3 days. So this is dough that I made yesterday. Same exact recipe. I don't. Maybe I should show it there. I haven't gotten used to this. So, and you can see, very elastic, very extensible, able to stretch and hold what's considered sometimes sometimes a window pane, so you can actually see light through your dough. This is good. This is what we want for building the strength in our bread and for our loaves to rise well. So, what I'm going to do next is sort of go through a series of shapes that you can make with this dough. This dough is, oh, actually, I wanted to show that. Tom?
Yes.
Can you take this around and let people just touch it and poke at it? So feel free to stick your fingers in here, okay? I'm not worried about it. But I want you to see what it looks like after it's just been mixed. So when you are dumping your dough out and getting ready to shape it the next day or next couple of days, you're going to want to flour your surface, a light flouring, but enough so that it won't stick. But I'm going to leave the top of the dough that I just dumped out sort of wet and moist. I'm not going to coat it with flour because I'm going to use the stickiness of it to help with what's considered pre-shaping. So for the first shape I'm going to do is called a boule. It's just a round blob of dough that can be turned into a loaf. So you can see I'm grabbing the wet sides and pushing them towards the center, okay? Sort of drawing it up like a drawstring purse. Then I'm going to flip the dough over. Is this still visible? Okay. And then I'm going to do a sort of a rounding technique. So my table or surface that you're working on is free of flour. The dough underneath is still a little moist, and I'm going to rotate the dough like this. Now, if the dough begins to stick a little bit, feels tacky against your hands, you can sort of just dust your hands like that. And what you'll be able to do is draw your loaf up into sort of a perky little ball, okay? And this is, thanks. Your dough now ready to rise before it goes into the oven. You could take this and put it on a piece of parchment paper on a sheet pan and let it rise that way. It will, as it rises, grow bigger, but it will also spread out because it's such a slack dough. So I like to rise this dough in a basket. You can use any basket. It does not have to be these cute little ones with the willow stripes on them. These I pick up from Lucky Clover Trading Company for like $7 a piece or something. Do not buy the really, really fancy ones that are like 25 bucks a piece. It's not worth it. But you could also use like a pottery bowl. Just line it with a tea towel that you've sprinkled with a little flour turn it upside down. So now this is the bottom of my loaf, and it's going to rise slowly in this basket, covered with a little plastic wrap. And the speed at which it rises is highly variable depending on the temperature of your kitchen, the temperature of the environment, how cold your dough was when you got to shaping it. For sure, you would rise that for an hour and a half, even in a fairly warm kitchen. Could be two hours. You'll just be looking for it to sort of nearly double its volume. So, if I wanted to turn this dough into, say, dinner rolls, I'm just going to cut, again, a smaller blob of dough. This is about 120 grams each. Bring it up to the center, flip them over, flour my hands on the top, and roll until they have some tension. So we want that tension there so that as it rises, it doesn't just spread totally out. These are pretty big rolls. That one could probably be like a bread bowl. This dough works very well for bread bowls. This is, by the way, this is the dough that I use for my baguettes that I sell, for my bread bowls that I sell. So it's definitely a good one. Okay, so I'm just going to let these rise on this. Tom, can I send you around and just feel free again to sort of get a sense of what I've done here. Feel free to poke and just let people look at those. Great. Nicole, there is a tray of dough in the fridge. Could you bring that to me? Sorry?
Is that a special kind of liner?
Oh, this one here? Yeah, this is, I think it's actually linen. You can use like a tea towel, just so that it's a fine woven one, not a fuzzy one. And then you just coat it with flour. So yeah, I will be talking about that in just a sec. The question was whether what the cloths are that I'm using. So this one here that it's going to be used for baguettes is a linen. I think this here is just a cotton one, but it's one that you can buy along with the baskets. But a tea towel that's not nubby, that's a fine weave with some flour coated in it works just fine. So what I'm going to show you next is shaping a baguette. So these are blobs of dough that I pre-shaped and threw in the fridge, just so they would be nice and relaxed. Thanks. Let me set it back here. So one thing you want to be aware of, especially when you're making baguettes, is how much tension in the dough there is. So like here, I'm trying to create tension. Here with the baguette, I'm trying to extend it to a distance of that 18, 19 inches. So I need to make sure it's not too tense. So I will pre-shape the dough, let it sit in the fridge or even out on the countertop before I begin what is called, considered the final shaping for a baguette. So here I'm going to sort of start with a rectangular shape. I'm bringing 1/3 of the dough down on itself. This is the sticky side up. Then, like a business envelope or business letter, I'm bringing the other third up like that, okay? Then I'm going to sort of flour the side of my hand, and I'm going to press a trench down the center of the dough. And then, I don't know if this is a good shot or not, I'm going to actually be folding this top half of the trench evenly with the bottom half, and then using the heel of my hand to seal that by pressing directly down. Is that showing up there?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've done a lot of manipulation of this dough in that folding procedure. But what it will do, it'll do two things. One is it'll give it a nice uniform consistency, so there won't be like big air bubbles in it. If I just take a blob of dough and try to roll it out like a snake, it's not going to be as consistent as if I do that sort of folding method. Now, having folded it, it's tightened up the gluten. So I'm going to let this one rest before I extend it to a full baguette size. But I will repeat this for you, because I think baguettes are a great thing. Yes, Maggie?
If you were going to fill that with cheese, my favorite one, do you do that when you're folding or do you do it later?
I do it when I fold it.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, the timer went off. Okay, so I don't know if you can see, this dough has already begun develop some strength before it would tear off when I did this. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, again, dipping my hands in water so they don't stick. I'm just going to pull this out as far as it can go without tearing and fold it down about halfway. Same thing from the opposite end. Fold over, and then from side to side. Fold over. And the last fold will be a little resistant because we've already been activating that gluten again. So here, and then I usually put the folds bottom down. Tom, can you set another timer?
How much?
15.
Okay.
So I'll come back to this in 15 minutes and we'll see what's going on there. To repeat the baguette shaping, so fold down a third, fold up a third, trench down the center, fold all the way in half, like that. We'll let that one sit aside. So now I'm going to extend this baguette to probably 18 or 19 inches. So what I did is I start in the middle, I roll a couple of times, and then I'm very gently, this is a fairly elastic dough, moving my hands down the length, and it extends as I go. So a couple of things to note. One is it's handy to keep an eye on the seam, the bottom of where I sealed the baguette, because we want that to end up on the bottom of the oven when we bake, because that is a little weaker than the top, and we don't want the baguette to unravel. And then what I'm going to do is put it in this linen here. And just fold it up around it like this. This is not absolutely necessary, but what I find is it provides a little support to the baguettes so they can rise and they will be rounder. If I just take the baguette dough and put it on a piece of parchment, it will rise, but it will spread out. So your baguettes will be a little flat, but not as round.